The day the excavator arrived on Robert Mercer's property without warning was the day his quiet suburban life transformed into a personal crusade against corporate overreach and neighborhood politics. Robert had been tending to his prized tomato garden when the rumble of heavy machinery drew his attention to the far corner of his 3-acre lot. A bright yellow excavator was digging a trench along the creek that meandered through his property, the same creek his grandfather had told him stories about as a child, the same creek where he taught his own children to fish. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Robert shouted, storming across his lawn. The operator, a young man in a hard hat, simply pointed to a document taped to the side of his machine. "Easement orders, sir, signed by the Whispering Pines HOA board. We're laying pipeline for the new development across the highway." Robert snatched the paper, eyes scanning the legal jargon until he found what he was looking for, a signature from Marcus Greenfield, HOA president and local real estate developer. The same Marcus Greenfield who had tried to buy Robert's property 4 times in the past year, each time with a lowball offer and veiled threats about potential code violations. "This easement is invalid," Robert said, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "I never signed off on this." The operator shrugged. "Not my problem, sir. I've got my orders." As the machine continued to tear into his land, Robert's mind raced through 23 years of property ownership. He purchased this land when the surrounding area was still rural, before the suburban sprawl reached their quiet corner of Chester County. He paid extra for those water rights his lawyer had insisted were invaluable given the development pressure in the area. "Stop your machine," Robert demanded. When the operator ignored him, he pulled out his phone and dialed the sheriff's department. That evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the fresh scar in his land, Robert sat at his kitchen table surrounded by property deeds, county records, and HOA bylaws. His wife, Eleanor, placed a cup of coffee beside him. "They can't just take our land, can they?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. "Technically, they can claim an easement for utilities," Robert replied, pointing to a clause in the HOA agreement. "But there's something wrong here. The board never put this to a vote. And look at this." He tapped a county map showing property boundaries. "They're routing this pipeline exclusively through our property, even though it would be shorter and cheaper to run along the county road." Eleanor studied the documents. "It's because of Marcus, isn't it? He's still angry you won't sell to him." Robert nodded slowly. "I think so. But they made one critical mistake." He pulled out a yellow document from the bottom of the pile, his original property deed from 1999. They forgot about the water rights. The next morning, Robert visited the county records office, where he confirmed what he already suspected. His property deed included exclusive rights to the creek and its waters, rights that the HOA couldn't override with this simple easement. As he drove home, a plan began to form. Robert had spent 30 years as an environmental engineer before retirement. He understood water systems better than anyone in the county, and if Marcus Greenfield and his cronies wanted to play dirty, well, Robert was ready to give them a taste of what happened when you mess with a man's land, especially when that man held the rights to every drop of water flowing through it. That evening, he made 3 phone calls. One to his old college roommate who had become an environmental lawyer, one to the state's Department of Environmental Protection, and one to a reporter at the local newspaper who had previously covered Marcus Greenfield's questionable development practices. 3 days after discovering the excavator on his property, Robert found himself sitting across from Catherine Alvarez, the environmental lawyer he'd known since college. Her office walls displayed framed newspaper clippings of past victories against developers who had violated environmental regulations. "So you're telling me they started digging without proper permits or environmental impact studies?" Catherine asked, peering over her reading glasses at the documentation Robert had meticulously compiled. "Exactly," Robert confirmed, sliding a folder across her desk. "The HOA board, under Marcus Greenfield's direction, approved this pipeline to service his new luxury development. But here's where it gets interesting." He opened a county map showing water tables and property boundaries. "This pipeline isn't just crossing my land. It's designed to draw water from my creek, which feeds into the aquifer serving the entire eastern part of the county." Catherine whistled low. "And you hold exclusive water rights?" Granted in 1999, when water rights weren't considered particularly valuable in this area, Robert nodded. "My grandfather always said water would be worth more than gold someday." Seems he was right. Outside Catherine's office window, dark clouds gathered. Chester County had been suffering from an unusually dry spring, with reservoir levels dropping weekly. Marcus Greenfield's new development, ironically named Crystal Springs, was marketing itself as a luxury community with abundant water features. The sheriff made them stop work temporarily, Robert continued, but the HOA is claiming emergency powers under their bylaws due to critical infrastructure needs. They scheduled an emergency board meeting tomorrow night to retroactively approve the easement. Catherine leaned back in her chair. They're rushing this through because they know they're on shaky legal ground. But Robert, you need to understand what you're up against. Marcus Greenfield has connections throughout the county. He's donated to every politician's campaign fund, sits on half a dozen community boards, and has 3 former business associates on the judge rotation. I'm not backing down, Robert said firmly. This isn't just about my property anymore. It's about how the HOA is systematically abusing its power. Did you see what they did to the Wilsons last month? Forced them to tear down their wheelchair ramp because it was painted the wrong shade of beige. Catherine nodded, a slight smile forming. I did see that. And I also saw how you helped them file an ADA complaint that made the HOA back down within 48 hours. The rain began to fall as Catherine outlined their legal strategy. By the time Robert left her office, armed with court filings and injunction papers, the storm had intensified, a fitting backdrop for the conflict brewing in Whispering Pines. That evening, Robert made copies of all his documentation and distributed them to neighbors he trusted. The HOA had succeeded for years by keeping homeowners isolated and uninformed, but Robert had spent his career building coalitions to solve complex problems. He knew the power of informed community. The following night, Robert and Eleanor arrived early at the community center for the emergency HOA meeting. They were surprised to find the parking lot already full. Inside, instead of the usual sparse attendance, nearly 200 residents filled the room. Marcus Greenfield looked visibly unsettled as he called the meeting to order. His typical commanding presence seemed diminished by the unexpected crowd. We're here tonight to approve an emergency easement for essential community infrastructure. Marcus began, his voice conveying practiced authority. The board has reviewed the proposal and unanimously recommends approval. I'd like to speak against the motion, Robert said, rising from his seat. Marcus's smile tightened. Mr. Mercer, this is not a debate. The bylaws clearly state. The bylaws state that any homeowner may speak for 3 minutes on any motion before the board. Eleanor interrupted, holding up a printed copy of the HOA Constitution. And the bylaws also state that emergency powers can only be invoked for public safety issues, not construction projects. A murmur spread through the crowd as Robert walked to the front of the room. He connected his laptop to the projector and displayed a detailed map of the watershed. What you're looking at isn't just a pipeline for community use, Robert explained to the assembled homeowners. This is a commercial water extraction project disguised as community infrastructure. The pipeline being constructed across my property is designed to divert water from our community's primary aquifer to supply Marcus Greenfield's new Crystal Springs development. The Chester County Chronicle's front page headline read, Pipeline Siointaro VRSI, HOA a CUSD of water rights TAFT. Sarah Chen's article detailed how the Whispering Pines HOA had attempted to seize a portion of Robert Mercer's land for a pipeline that would redirect water to Marcus Greenfield's new development. The story included damning quotes from environmental experts about the potential impact on the local watershed. Robert folded the newspaper and placed it on his kitchen table next to a stack of letters from neighbors offering support. Outside his window, a group of volunteers had set up a monitoring station by the creek, documenting water levels and taking soil samples. What had begun as his personal battle had evolved into a community environmental movement. The DEP inspector is here, Eleanor called from the front door. Robert grabbed his documentation binder and headed outside to meet Monica Walsh, a stern-looking woman from the Department of Environmental Protection. Mr. Mercer, she greeted him, clipboard in hand. I understand you filed a complaint regarding unauthorized water diversion activities. Yes, and thank you for coming so quickly, Robert replied, leading her toward the excavation site where yellow caution tape now surrounded the half-dug trench. The HOA began this work without proper environmental studies or permits. I've compiled all the relevant documentation, including my water rights deed. For the next 2 hours, Monica meticulously examined the site, taking photographs and soil samples while Robert explained how the pipeline would affect the watershed. Her expression remained neutral, but she took detailed notes. Based on my preliminary assessment, there appear to be multiple violations here, she finally stated. Construction in a protected watershed without proper permits is a serious offense. I'll be issuing a stop work order effective immediately until a full environmental impact study can be conducted. Robert tried to contain his relief. How long will that process take? A comprehensive study? 6 to 8 months minimum. Monica closed her notebook. And given that this creek feeds into protected wetlands downstream, the requirements will be stringent. As the DEP inspector drove away, Robert received a text message from Catherine Alvarez. Judge Harriman granted our emergency injunction. HOA legally barred from continuing work until case is heard. Court date set for next month. The dual victories should have felt satisfying, but Robert knew Marcus Greenfield too well to believe this was over. The developer had built his fortune by navigating or circumventing regulatory obstacles. His suspicion proved correct when 3 days later, an official-looking envelope arrived containing a notice of fines for unauthorized landscaping modifications and improper water feature maintenance totaling $500 per day, backdated 6 weeks. "They're trying to bankrupt us into submission," Eleanor observed, reading the notice over Robert's shoulder. "Or provoke me into doing something rash," Robert replied. "Marcus wants me to lose my temper publicly, give him ammunition to paint me as unreasonable." Instead of reacting angrily, Robert methodically photographed his property, documenting its compliance with all HOA regulations. He then filed a formal appeal and requested a hearing before the Architectural Review Committee. Meanwhile, Sarah Chen's article had sparked widespread interest. Local environmental groups began organizing around the issue, and several neighboring HOAs reached out expressing concerns about how Greenfield's development might affect their water access. One evening, as Robert was reviewing county records at his kitchen table, his doorbell rang. Outside stood Thomas Wright, a longtime HOA board member and Marcus Greenfield's usual ally. "May I come in, Robert?" Thomas asked, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "I think there are some things you should know." Over coffee, Thomas revealed that Marcus had been planning the water diversion for years. "He's been buying up properties with water access throughout the county, but yours is the critical link. Without access to your creek, his entire development concept falls apart." "Why are you telling me this?" Robert asked. Thomas sighed heavily. "I've been on the board for 12 years. I believe we were making the neighborhood better. But what Marcus is doing now, this isn't about community standards. This is purely about profit, and he's dragging the HOA into potentially illegal activity." Thomas slid a USB drive across the table. Board meeting minutes, emails, preliminary plans. The Whispering Pines Community Center buzzed with tension as residents filed in for what had become the most anticipated HOA meeting in neighborhood history. Local news vans lined the parking lot, and Sarah Chen positioned herself near the front, recorder in hand. Robert and Eleanor sat in the second row, surrounded by supporters wearing blue ribbons, a symbol of water protection that had spread throughout the community. Marcus Greenfield strode in 10 minutes late, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits whom Robert recognized as Greenfield Development's attorneys. Marcus's typically immaculate appearance showed signs of strain, his tie slightly askew, dark circles beneath his eyes. This emergency session will address the irresponsible actions of one homeowner who has jeopardized vital community infrastructure. Marcus began without preamble, his voice carrying a sharp edge. "Robert Mercer has deliberately obstructed progress and most recently attempted to surrender water rights that affect all property owners to a county conservation trust without proper consultation." Robert remained calm as murmurs rippled through the crowd. He had anticipated this line of attack. Before we continue, a voice interrupted from the back of the room. Catherine Alvarez stood, legal briefcase in hand. "I'd like to clarify a critical legal point. My client, Mr. Mercer, holds exclusive water rights to Pinewood Creek as documented in his 1999 deed. These rights were separately purchased and are not subject to HOA governance or approval." Marcus's face flushed red. "That's a matter of legal interpretation. Our bylaws clearly state." "Your bylaws cannot override state water law," Catherine interrupted smoothly. "Furthermore, I've filed these documents with the court this morning." She held up a folder. "The County Environmental Protection Office has officially accepted Mr. Mercer's conservation easement. The creek and its waters are now legally protected from commercial development in perpetuity." Gasps and scattered applause filled the room. Marcus gripped the podium, knuckles whitening. "This meeting will come to order," he demanded, banging his gavel. "We're here to discuss Mr. Mercer's violations of HOA regulations and the punitive measures." "Point of order," a steady voice called out. Thomas Wright stood up, shoulders squared, as board secretary, and moved that we first address the evidence of improper conduct by certain board members regarding the pipeline project. Marcus's face went from red to ashen. "That's not on the agenda." "I second the motion," called another board member, Patricia Lawson, who had previously remained silent on the issue. Forced by his own rigid adherence to parliamentary procedure, Marcus had no choice but to allow the motion to be considered. When the vote was called, the community overwhelmingly supported examining the board's conduct before addressing Robert's alleged violations. Thomas approached the podium, visibly nervous but determined. "For the past 3 years, several board members, primarily led by our president, have systematically targeted properties with strategic water access. Using selective enforcement of HOA regulations, they've pressured homeowners to sell at below market rates or grant easements benefiting Greenfield Development's projects." He connected his laptop to the projector and displayed a series of emails and meeting minutes. These documents show a clear pattern of coordination between HOA enforcement actions and Greenfield Development's acquisition strategy. The room erupted in angry shouts as homeowners recognized their own addresses in the targeted list. One document particularly damning was an email from Marcus to board members outlining how to use architectural violations to make problem owners more amenable to reasonable offers. "This is slander," Marcus shouted over the growing chaos. "These documents are taken out of context." "I can provide context," said a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Monica Walsh from the DEP, accompanied by two officials in suits. "Marcus Greenfield, I'm serving you with cease and desist orders for multiple violations of state water regulations. Our investigation has uncovered evidence of systematic water diversion activities throughout the county without proper permits or environmental impact studies." One of the officials stepped forward. "Mr. Greenfield, I'm Special Agent Carson with the State Attorney General's office. We'd like to ask you some questions regarding potential conflicts of interest in your dual roles as HOA president and developer." As Marcus was escorted from the room, the remaining board members looked shell-shocked. Patricia Lawson quickly called for a motion to suspend all fines against Robert Mercer. 6 months after the dramatic showdown at the community center, Robert Mercer stood on the banks of Pinewood Creek, watching the autumn leaves drift across its surface. The water flowed clear and strong despite the regional drought that had lowered reservoir levels throughout Chester County. Behind him, a small crowd gathered for the unveiling of a new sign: "Pinewood Creek Water Preserve, protected in perpetuity." "Ready for your speech?" Eleanor asked, joining him by the water's edge. She handed him a folded piece of paper with his talking points. Robert smiled, tucking the paper into his pocket unread. "I think I'll speak from the heart today." The past half-year had transformed both Robert and the Whispering Pines community. Following Marcus Greenfield's removal as HOA president, the neighborhood had elected an entirely new board, one committed to transparency and genuine community improvement. Robert had declined nomination, preferring to focus on broader water conservation efforts. As he approached the podium, Robert surveyed the crowd. Neighbors who had once avoided each other now chatted warmly. The community that Marcus had kept divided through fear and selective enforcement had united in common purpose. "Thank you all for coming today," Robert began, his voice carrying across the gathering. "When I first bought this property 23 years ago, I never imagined I'd become the center of a neighborhood revolution." Laughter rippled through the audience. But that's exactly what happened. Not because I'm special, but because water is. Water connects us all. It flows beneath property lines, ignores HOA boundaries, and sustains every living thing in our community. Robert gestured toward the creek. "What began as my fight to protect my property became something much more important. A community standing up for its shared resources and against abuse of power." In the months following Marcus Greenfield's removal, the State Attorney General's investigation had uncovered a complex web of corruption extending far beyond Whispering Pines. Marcus now faced multiple felony charges for water rights violations, fraud, and abuse of HOA authority. His Crystal Springs development had been foreclosed upon, the half-built luxury homes standing empty as the courts determined their fate. "Today, we're celebrating more than just the protection of this creek," Robert continued. "We're celebrating the Homeowners' Rights and Water Protection Act that our county commissioners unanimously passed last month. The legislation, which Robert had helped draft with Catherine Alvarez, established strict oversight of HOAs, limited their power to impose punitive fines, and created strong protections for water rights throughout the county. 3 neighboring counties had already begun adopting similar measures. None of this would have happened without each of you," Robert acknowledged, looking at the faces of his neighbors, especially those who risked their positions to stand up for what's right. His gaze fell on Thomas Wright, who had testified against Marcus and provided crucial evidence to investigators. The former board secretary had since become a vocal advocate for HOA reform throughout the state. "And I'd like to recognize someone whose reporting helped bring these issues to light," Robert added, nodding towards Sarah Chen, who stood at the back with her notebook. Her series of investigative articles on water rights abuses had recently won a regional journalism award and sparked similar investigations in communities across the state. As Robert concluded his remarks, Catherine Alvarez joined him at the podium. "There's one more announcement today," she said, handing Robert an official-looking document.